If you were sitting on the new vaccine advisory committee today, what would be the very first change or study you would propose?
Oh, for sure, a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. I would propose that. And I would, well, actually, no, I would propose that. But I think the first thing that I would do would be to get access to every single database around the world that's possible and look at autism and vaccines. I think that's something that could be very easily done and has never been done and needs to be done. When I went to write the book, by far, this was the most shocking thing I've ever seen in my life.
Hello, hello, Heal Squad. Welcome back to part two of my conversation with Dr. Joel Gator Warsh. If you missed part one, please check it out. We talked about vaccines and everything parents need to know to make truly informed decisions about what they're giving their kids. Today, we're going to talk about the slow schedule, kids' long-term health. We're going to talk about autism, vax versus unvaxxed, what he's seeing in his practice. We'll get into the kind of diet he recommends for growing bodies and so much more. So, Doc, you are practicing as a pediatrician.
Correct.
What do you see in terms of vax versus unvaxxed? Because I'll tell you, in my doctor's practice, she sees a massive difference between vax and unvaxxed kids.
I wouldn't say I see a massive difference, but I think I do see a difference. It's hard. I mean, it's not scientific, in any way. It's just kind of what I've seen. But I do feel like the kids that have fewer vaccines seem to come in less. So seems like they have fewer ear infections and fewer colds and fewer autoimmune conditions. But that's not I don't see enough kids to really have a definitive answer on that. And also kids that tend to not get vaccines just don't come in as much in general. So I think there's some bias there, but I think that's what most people that see both have seen. I have talked to many doctors. I know many doctors that have integrative practices, and the general consensus that I've ever seen is that most people feel like kids that have not got vaccines get fewer of those common illnesses than other kids. And I don't know if that's true or untrue, but I do think it's reasonable to study it. I think that's a really good thing to know. And
Yeah. Well, you guys are on the ground. So if that's what everyone is seeing, that's important information because, like I said at the beginning of our first conversation, and we've talked about the lack of trust. Well, when there's a lack of trust, because if it's not in their favor to learn to study these things, the only way we're going to study is through word of mouth and through individuals' accounts because we're not getting the full story generally in any area, farming and agriculture and medicine and anything, politics. We're not getting the full story anywhere for anything.
yeah. Well, I think the most important study we can get at the moment is doing a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study prospectively. I know that there are ethical concerns around doing it, so I think it just needs to be open label. People that don't want to vaccinate can choose not to vaccinate. People that do can, or people can do a slow schedule. They can choose whatever they do, and we follow them forward. But I think we have to know that because it's really valuable information. Now, yes, kids that are unvaccinated might live a different lifestyle, might eat a little bit differently. There are all sorts of things they might do differently. Fine. That's going to be the confounders we're going to have to deal with after. But I think we at least need to get that baseline first to see what a lot of practitioners have seen and see if that actually is true with 100,000 or a million kids and kind of follow them forward and see if that makes sense. Because if it is true, it's going to open up a lot of important conversation because we still want to protect against diseases. And if everybody stops vaccinating, then some of these diseases are going to come roaring back. So that's something that we need to consider potentially. But at the same time, if it is affecting kids' immune system in some sort of overall negative way, then we need to know that so we can study that and say, okay, well, then how do we get the most benefit for the least risk? How do we protect kids from the diseases that we really want to protect? Or maybe we have to identify the most important 3 vaccines or 5 vaccines or whatever it is to prioritize. And let's do that in a way where we can still protect them from the diseases, but minimize the effect on their immune system or minimize the risk to getting an autoimmune condition or whatever it is. I mean, that's what research and science is. I don't know the answer. I don't know what we're going to find, but if we do not look, we're never going to know. And I don't know, I think role as a doctor, as a pediatrician, and as a dad is to help people to be healthy. It's not to promote vaccines. It's not about giving kids more vaccines. If giving them 10,000 vaccines makes them the healthiest, great. If giving them 0 vaccines makes them the healthiest, great. Our job is to make kids healthy. It's not to give a medical product. And so I think we can't put vaccines on a pedestal like we have in the past. We need to understand them as a tool, and we need to study how they are working in real life today. We're not 100 years ago where everybody's dying of all these conditions. We have better nutrition and better sanitation and better hospitals. We have to understand what's going on in our society today and figure out how we can use these as a tool to best help our kids to be healthy. And if it is creating some issues, we should know that so we can make changes. There's nothing controversial about that. Unless you just don't want to look into it, that's the only controversy. Other than that, we should want healthy kids and we should all be on the same team. And not everyone agrees how to get there, but don't we all agree we want healthy kids? And if they are related to asthma, autoimmune conditions, autism, whatever, then I want to know that so we can make changes. I don't want to give somebody something that's going to increase their risk or increase their risk overall versus giving them something that they're probably not even going to see or get or have a problem with. But I also want to protect them against something that they might come into contact with or might kill them. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the neutrality. I have to say the whole reason they're not is because they don't benefit from taking hundreds of vaccines off the market. That's why they're making so much money. And so, unfortunately, it goes back to our earlier conversation in part one of doctors are well intentioned. They go to school to become doctors to help people, and then they get stuck in this shit system, unfortunately, that is just about money. And doctors are handcuffed in a lot of ways. And so it's unfortunate. I don't know if the study will ever take place unless it's done independently somehow from, a billionaire or something. I don't think the NIH is, yeah, I don't think the NIH is incentivized. I don't know what Robert Kennedy's doing now because he was very anti-vax, I feel like. And I think now it seems like he's focused on dyes and food and stuff where I think he would be the one to lead the charge for this study. I don't know if they've gotten to him and, you know,
I think he's doing more with vaccines now. So I
is
don't know.
he? I haven't heard much, but I also am not following the news very carefully. I just kind of see some headlines. I haven't heard him really attacking it other than there was something recently. Maybe it was for the COVID ones.
He's been doing so. I think he started. I don't know, but I believe he started more with food. It was a little bit less controversial, and then he's moving back into doing more vaccine stuff. There certainly has been a lot more in the news in the last couple months. So I
Yeah.
think so.
He'd be the one to do it.
He'd be the one to do it, but honestly, he shouldn't be the one to do it. It should be billionaires. Like that would be better. I think it needs to be some people that are more unbiased. And
Yeah.
maybe it's like, it doesn't have to be just billionaires, but a billionaire starts it and, begins the funding and people can crowdfund it. And there are a lot of people that would volunteer for a study like that and you follow it forward for 30 years.
Maybe you need to do it and crowdfund
Yeah,
it.
maybe. I don't know. It's such a big project. I mean, you need billions of dollars, you need the researchers, but it could be something to do over the long run,
Yeah.
Could
Well,
be.
here's the thing. It's like you need someone who is open to any possibility
Yeah.
because what you're saying throughout this whole thing, you are open to either possibility. And so you can't have somebody leading it that has any kind of bias because you can sway results. They do it all day long. I've talked to researchers enough to know that whatever their hypothesis is, they are skewing it to get the result that they want. And so you need someone like you that will be very fair and down the road about it. And I think you could crowdfund it and make tons of money doing it to get it done. So launching that idea or leaving that in your brain. Um, and and so when you talk about the slow schedules, is that something that you have done a lot of in your practice? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so many patients do it. I said that's probably the most common thing in the practice. Everyone is different. In the book, I try to put a few examples, but there's no people always ask me like, oh, how do I do a slow schedule? It's very independent because nothing, again, has ever been studied. I said, oh, well, this is a little better than the other thing. The only thing that's been studied is the CDC schedule. So any sort of slow schedule is kind of up to you. And slow schedule could mean a couple of things. It could mean you decide you want to start later. So instead of doing vaccines at 2 months or 4 months, maybe you want to start at 6 months or 1 year, 2 years, or 4 years. That's up to each person to decide when they're comfortable. Or it could mean spacing out vaccines more than they usually are on the regular schedule. So if you go in at a certain visit, let's say 2 months, you might get 3 vaccines. You might just want to do one at a time. as opposed to doing 3. So most commonly in the office, when people do a slow schedule, they just do 1 at a time, and they space them out and do them maybe once every month or once every 2 months. And they still get all the vaccines, but they just go slower, and they don't do 3 or 4 on one visit. They just do 1 at a time, and they still end up getting them all at the end. They're at the same place. They just don't do as many at the same visit.
Have you seen any benefit to that?
It's hard to say. I would say from a common sense perspective, the negative is you just have to come in more, but you're not loading the body with as many things at the same time. If there is a reaction, you can pay a little more attention to it. You can space things out a little bit more. It's a little bit more individualized. So I think it's not unreasonable for those that are able to come in and are more interested in doing that. That sometimes that's a happy medium for parents, where for me, if they're more comfortable doing that, then I don't have any problem with it. For my practice, it's more people that can come in, so it's not as big an issue for some people. A couple more visits is a big problem. They can't financially do it. They can't physically get there, so it's not always practical for everybody. But for the family that really does want to space things out and go as slow as possible, that's not an unreasonable middle ground. And then you can do the ones that you have the most concern about and just space them out and do them over 4 or 5 years instead of getting them done over a year or two.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
5 and 1.
5 and 1. Are you able to share what you do with them?
I don't ever talk about them just because I think it's unfair to them. I get asked all the time, so they can share
Yeah.
their own, in the future. But again, in the office we do everything, so yeah, I leave it for them. They can share their own health information one day if they want to.
Yeah. I understand that. I understand that. Um, what about like, I know even with my dogs, like there was a veterinarian who talked about almost like a slow schedule with dogs and then propping up the immune system with different supplements. Do you encourage any supplements for kids while they're doing these vaccinations?
We have things in the office. I When people ask me about detoxification or supplements, I again have to bring it back to, like, why don't we know this stuff, right? Like, why are we not studying the genetics, the supplements, the herbs, detoxification, the things that could minimize your risk and help the vaccines to work better? I've never seen any studies like that. And of course, if you want people to vaccinate, what's the first thing that's going to be helpful? Decrease the risk, show people how to decrease their risk. They're going to love that. They're going to love looking at their genetics. They're going to love doing something to support their immune system, but no one's ever done it. So of course, we should do that. I go first with, okay, well, what do we naturally do that helps us with detoxification? Sweat, pooping, and peeing. So support those things. Make sure kids getting outside. Make sure they're sweating if they're a little bit older and moving, getting some sunlight. Make sure they're going to the bathroom, so you don't want them to be dehydrated around when they're getting vaccines. So make sure they're drinking a lot of fluid before and after. Make sure they're going to the bathroom, so lots of good fiber before and after vaccines. Magnesium is fantastic for going to the bathroom, so that works really well for a lot of people. So,
What's a good source of fiber for young kids?
I mean, fruits and vegetables, So I think, those kinds of things, just regular, just eating healthy, I guess. But that's where you're going to get your nutrients and your vitamin. I mean, the healthiest kids are going to be the kids that are eating healthy food. That's what supports your body. That's going to decrease your risk for a vaccine reaction and decrease your risk of a reaction from an actual disease. So I think it gets back to basics on that. If you want to do other things like vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc, I think that's fine. But nothing's ever been studied. But we feel like it supports your immune system in general, so it probably doesn't hurt. And that's the kind of stuff we have in the office if people want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it is frustrating where, the medical training doesn't come with any nutrition.
Right, it doesn't. You learn about nutritional deficiencies, so you learn about diseases and rickets and those kinds of things, but you don't really learn a lot about eating healthy and nutrition and how that's related. And that's something that just has to change. I don't know that doctors are going to be even the best people to discuss that so much, but I think that they need to learn it so that way they can respect it and make it a part of their discussions as much as possible, or at least collaborate with nutritionists a little bit more. I think that's the future, and we have to do that.
Yeah. Um, if you were sitting on the new vaccine advisory committee today, what would be the very first change or study you would propose?
Oh, for sure, a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. I would propose that. And well, actually, no, I would propose that. But I think the first thing that I would do would be to get access to every single database around the world that's possible and look at autism and vaccines. I think that's something that could be very easily done and has never been done, and needs to be done quickly.
Yeah, what do you think I know autism is such a hot topic around vaccines. What is your thought?
Yeah, when we're talking about controversy, vaccines are very controversial. The top of that is vaccines and autism is the very pinnacle of controversy. Going back to my training, first, I was always taught, and this is really the common thought process, is that vaccines don't cause autism. It's been studied, proven, debunked. We have super great science, and that's what I was always taught, and that's what I said for a long time. And there was no real reason to look into it other than that. That's what the CDC says. That's what the major bodies say. So they obviously have great information. When I went to write the book, by far, this was the most shocking thing I've ever seen in my life. And there are plenty of shocking things in doing the research, but for sure, this is very shocking. And again, I'm someone who's in the integrative space, so I have some idea of some of the other stuff that's going on and some of the concerns around things like vaccines and autism, where most doctors don't even know that. But I still, when I went in, thought, okay, there's going to be this amazing body of evidence that looks at vaccines and autism, and it's going to be really strong evidence that vaccines don't cause autism. But I also know that there are some other things out there, some other discussions, some other studies that maybe there is some relation. So I kind of want to show both sides and show, here's why we say this, but here's the other things, and maybe it's not as definitive as you think. So let's not just poo-poo these other things. Let's look into it a little bit more. When you actually look at the research, it just doesn't exist, which is the most insane thing I've ever seen at all. There is research on MMR. There's research on thimerosal, which is the mercury component of vaccines. And that's basically it. There is no research on vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. There is no research on all the vaccines. There is no research on almost any of the other vaccines. And you get many of them in the first year. So to make the claim that the science is settled or it's been debunked, it just makes no sense. Doctors have definitely not looked into the research themselves, because anyone that does would never say that. And I was so shocked to be able to say it. It puts me in a very weird position, because then you're very counter what has been said, but that's just what it is. If people want to go look themselves, go look. You want to send me something that you find, go for it. I'm happy to incorporate it, but it just doesn't exist. I couldn't believe it. I read things like Paul Offit's book and Peter Hotez's book and all sorts of books after I couldn't find anything. And they all showed the same research, which is just really about MMR. And even the MMR research is kids getting MMR versus not getting MMR in the setting of getting all their other vaccines. So we really don't know. I mean, we don't know that vaccines do cause autism. We don't know anything. So when someone like Secretary Kennedy says we need more research, we absolutely need more research. We haven't done it. And you would think that it was done. And that's why I said, you asked me, what would I do first? How could they have never taken the Kaiser data or some other big database and said, hey, let's look at this database and see how many kids get autism versus not autism that are vaccinated or unvaccinated, or how many vaccines they've gotten. There's no studies like that. It's insane. You would think there were so many studies like that. They could do that in just a few hours, and that's never been done.
But so what studies do exist? And actually hold that thought. By the way, there's a really cool bird that just keeps flying behind you. You have a really great background. Friends, I think we can all agree that Black Friday is one of the best shopping dates of the year. And guess what? We do not have to wait till November to score some deals. It is very, very exciting, because Macy's Black Friday in July is officially here, and it's making summer feel like the holidays, shopping-wise, of course, which means we can score holiday savings on some of our favorite summer items, like 50% off Levi's denim, hello new jeans, 50 to 70% off women's shoes, up to 40% off activewear from brands like Nike and Adidas, just in time to stay motivated for those workouts. Hopefully you guys are sticking to them. I know I am. So whether you're refreshing your closet, leveling up your gym fits, or you're just loving a good deal, this is your sign. These deals are only around July 23rd through the 27th. So run, do not walk to your nearest Macy's store, or hit up Macy's.com. I've included some of my favorites in the wish list below. Enjoy. So what studies have been done on the vaccines? Is it just effectiveness in holding back the disease? Because I had a peripheral conversation with somebody whose dad was a doctor and had studied stuff and was like, those studies are there, this, and this. And they were vehement. I mean, they were like, there was no potentials that could be explored.
That's what we were taught, and that's what's so crazy. So I mean, with autism specifically, for the chapter in the book, again, I was so surprised that what I end up doing, because I have a master's in epidemiology from previous life, and so I have a pretty decent understanding of how to do research. And so for that chapter, I kind of wrote out everything that I did and everything that I found. And for vaccines and autism specifically, it's just those MMR and those thimerosal studies and not really much more. And I kind of detailed what we have. There's some pretty good studies about those, but thimerosal is not even in vaccines anymore. So it's not really a major issue other than the flu vaccine. And then the measles, again, it's just one vaccine amongst many. We need all of them. So I think that's just something that needs to be recognized. So that way, again, medicine has to have some humility and say, no, we don't actually know the answer. We have to go look into this to see what we have found. In general about vaccines, yeah, what you're saying is very true. People have a belief about the way that things were studied that just aren't true. The regular schedule, the vaccines that were on the standard schedule, for the most part, were never studied in the best possible way for safety. Many of them were studied many, many years ago when we didn't study things like we do now, so they weren't blinded. So blinding means that the researchers don't know who the patients are, who's getting what treatment. They didn't necessarily use a placebo trial a long time ago. So there's a lot of discussion around the word placebo. That's happened a lot recently.
Mm-hmm.
Placebo, by definition, is supposed to mean an inert substance. So basically, most people would think of that as salt water or saline.
Mm-hmm.
The vaccines that we give to kids today on the regular schedule, basically none of them were studied pre-licensure, so before they hit the market, for safety with an inert placebo. A lot of the studies use placebos, which are actually another vaccine, an earlier version of that vaccine, or an active comparator. So like they take out the antigen, the actual thing, and they put just some other chemicals in there. So that's the way that most of them were actually studied. And that is when Secretary Kenny's talking about these things. That's how it was initially studied. There are some studies after. There are some studies with placebos for efficacy, so looking at how it works. There are some vaccines from around the world that are not on a regular schedule that were studied against a placebo, like the new COVID vaccine. Some of them were actually studied against a placebo, but a lot of the original ones were not. And so that I think is a concern because you're missing the best possible safety data. And a great example of that would be the whooping cough vaccine, so DTP. The new DTaP cellular pertussis vaccine was studied for the most part against the old DTP vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, whole cell. The old vaccine was taken off the market because of safety concerns. So if you are studying vaccine 1 versus vaccine 2 and you find the same problems, it's the thing safe because you're like, oh, well, it doesn't cause any more issues, so therefore it's safe. And that is the way a lot of things work. And like maybe an easier example, so group A versus group B, vaccine 1 versus vaccine 2, both groups get 10 seizures. Well, both groups get 10 seizures, so it's not more, vaccine B is not more unsafe than vaccine A we can put on the market. Versus the proper study, vaccine A versus vaccine B versus saline. Group A gets 10 seizures, group B gets 10 seizures, group C gets 1 seizure. You can see how that's a very different study and why having a saline placebo matters. Now, it may very well be true that the vaccines are completely safe and the ones that we've done, and there aren't any actual problems. And if you did it against saline, you wouldn't see any other issues. But
We don't know.
Study it like that. That's why you're supposed to study it like that.
But aren't all tests supposed to be with a placebo?
Yes, they are.
So then why wouldn't they use a real placebo unless they didn't want to know the answer? And then furthermore, if you really think about it, if what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, well, chickenpox for the most part isn't going to really kill anybody, but for a few, it might. We're doing the same thing with the vaccine. We're hedging bets and we're like, oh, well, it's going to hurt some people, but not enough to really make a difference. So let's just go for it.
The answer to your question is, are they supposed to do it? What does supposed to do it mean? Right? Like, because is that the best kind of research? Yes, we know that, but who is making them do that? If the FDA and the CDC and the committees that approve these things don't require them to do it that way, then they don't have to do it that way. Yeah. So they don't do it that way. And that's what's happened over the years. There's no requirement for that. That's when Secretary Kenny has been talking about that lately. He's like, for future, we want that. And there should be no controversy around a absolutely brand new vaccine. We're studying it. It has to be studied against an inert placebo for safety before we're even going to look to think about approving it. Like an example, again, the pneumococcus vaccine, when it first came on the market, there were no other vaccines. There were no other pneumococcus vaccines. They could have studied it against salt water. They studied it against the meningococcus vaccine. There's no reason to do that unless you want to minimize your chances of seeing a problem. It's not evil, it's just logical. You want to minimize your chance of having a problem, you do it that way, and then they're
using advantages to their
So don't let them do that. Now, if you have a vaccine on the market already, it makes it much more complicated because there's ethical dilemma if you get let's say you have a new measles vaccine that you want to put on the market. Well, ethically, you're not going to not give kids the measles vaccine because you're going to say, well, we have a really good measles vaccine. It protects you. We're going to leave these kids unprotected. Therefore, it's unethical to have an unvaccinated group. So you study the new vaccine versus the old vaccine. The problem is we never studied it originally properly in the first place. So now we have this huge problem because you can't study things in the most appropriate way because of ethics, but it wasn't done originally in the first place. So you only have relative safety and not absolute safety. And that's a problem because we need absolute safety to, again, to understand what it is and to give people confidence. Because again, if you do the right studies and it doesn't show a problem, that's going to give people more confidence to do it. That's what science is and shouldn't be called, anti-vax crazy people for just saying that. No, that is what science is. And that's what wasn't done. And it's just, you need to acknowledge that so we can move forward. It just wasn't ever done. It's probably never going to be done. But at least at a minimum, we could make a rule moving forward saying we want the best research possible for safety. If we're going to give a new vaccine to a newborn baby, it better have damn good research that it's safe. And it shouldn't be licensed like the hepatitis B vaccine, which you look at the hepatitis B vaccine insert. You know how long it was studied for safety on the vaccine insert? 4 to 5 days. You're giving a newborn baby, it's licensed based on that. There have been other studies since that point, but licensure studies, 4 to 5 days of safety. You're giving something to a newborn baby, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's not appropriate. Like there's no way that should think that's appropriate. We should be studying these things for 5 years or 3 years or 10 years, especially something that you're giving to a newborn baby that's healthy. We need to make sure that it's not increasing their risk of other things when the risk to getting the disease is actually super low.
It's quite depressing because you would think, as you're saying, we would want to protect our little ones. And like I said, the system is just not set up. It's like the bad side of capitalism, right? Like my parents moved to America for the American dream and they achieved it. Everybody who comes here says this is the best country in the world. And, we have all this opportunity that other countries don't have. But then it's the flip side of there's so much conflict of interest because of money, 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 money.
Yeah, and the companies have just gotten so big that over the last several decades, they know how to play the game. It's not evil. I mean, there are probably some evil people that are in some of these companies, but for the most part, it's just regular people. And what is their job? It's to make money. They got to make more money this quarter than the last quarter. They're going to get fired and the CEO is going to get removed. That's their job. They're not thinking about health, per se. If that's a side effect of their product, great. But they want to sell more products. That's their job. And the job of CDC, the FDA, all these other organizations is to police them. And nobody's doing it anymore because they know if we buy those things, if we pay them, if we fund them, then they're very unlikely to do anything. And also they're just overwhelmed. I mean, there are just so many things and so many big companies and so many products, and it's a big world with a lot of things, and they're overwhelmed to be able to handle it. So it's a tough place to be. And the guardrails are not there and haven't been for a while. And I do hope, with Secretary Kennedy, I mean, some people love him, some people hate him. I think without question, we need a shakeup, and that's what he's going to do. And some things are going to be not so good and some things are going to be good. But at the end of the day, I think we do need that. We do need some sort of shakeup. So hopefully it's going to be a net positive after the next couple of years, and we'll see. but it needs,
Yeah.
definitely does. And I wish and I hope that doctors will be a little bit more open-minded. I have seen it. I hope that things like this are going to help. That's why I'm doing this. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I'm talking about this, because I do think, again, doctors are good people. Nobody wants to do anything that's going to harm a kid. I don't think we know as a profession what the research actually shows. And I do think if people did know, they'd be a little bit more supportive of some of the stuff Secretary Kennedy wanted to do, not all of it, but some of it. And they would certainly be more open to getting more research. And I think that would be fine. And I think that doctors are afraid that if we start to research these things, then we might find some problems, and then people are just going to stop vaccinating and kids are going to die of all these diseases. And I don't think that's going to be the way that it's going to go. I think we will find some problems. We will identify those problems. We will work on those problems. We will make better vaccines. We will minimize those problems. And I don't think it has to be all or none. I think you can identify the issues and then minimize your risk from the medical products and still keep giving vaccines, but just make better ones.
Yeah. I very much appreciate the conversation, and I have hope that things will get better because we are becoming more aware, and the more we all become aware, the more we'll demand better. Guys, the book is called Between a Shot and a Hard Place. We'll put the link for it in the description of this episode, along with how to find Dr. Warsh. Thank you so much for being with us. And until next time, friends, be nice people, make good choices, and be present. Heal Squad, we have been on quite the journey together, and we're hearing from so many of you just how much this show is helping you heal and get better, and it makes us feel so good. We love, love, love it, and we just ask that you don't keep it to yourself. Spread the message and share the show or your favorite episode with your friends. And if you want to help us even more, you can leave us a 5-star rating and a comment on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us on Instagram at Heal Squad. You can also DM us anytime because we love connecting with you. And finally, you can also join us on Patreon for our monthly live heal events with world-class healers and ad-free episodes exclusive only to Patreon and our Super Heal Squad for as little as $10 a month. So go to patreon.com/Heal Squad to join. Getting better isn't easy, friends, but as I say all the time, it's a whole lot easier if we can do it together. We love you all so much, and we love doing this thing called life with you.
This podcast and all related content published or distributed by or on behalf of Maria Menounos or MariaMenounos.com is for informational purposes only and may include information that is general in nature and that is not specific to you. Any information or opinions expressed or contained herein are not intended to serve as or replace medical advice, nor to diagnose, prescribe, or treat any disease, condition, illness, or injury, and you should consult the healthcare professional of your choice regarding all matters concerning your health, including before beginning any exercise, weight loss, or healthcare program. If you have or suspect you may have a healthcare emergency, please contact a qualified healthcare professional for treatment. Any information or opinions provided by a guest expert or host featured within a website or on company's podcast are their own, not those of Maria Menounos or the company. Accordingly, Maria Menounos and the company cannot be responsible for any results or consequences or actions you may take based on information or opinions.